Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Association of the United States Army's annual conference and trade show in Washington, D.C., the #1 gathering of U.S. Army leaders from around the world. Our coverage here is sponsored by General Motors Defense, Bell, L3 Harris, and Leonardo DRS. During this great conference, we had an opportunity to talk to Dr. Bruce Jette, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. This is part one of our three-part conversation with Dr. Jette. Proud and distinguished graduate of West Point's class of 1976, who is the Assistant Secretary of the United States Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. Sir, thanks so much for the time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions and give you a little bit of an idea of what we're working on.
It's an extraordinary time. I mean, the one perennial in my career has been covering acquisition reform. We continue to talk about acquisition reform, and culture change in particular has been a focus. Talk to us about how you think acquisition culture has to change, but also how Army culture has to change, because the technological place we're going into is so rapid cycle that you need younger troops to senior troops having a level of technological understanding and engagement to be able to quickly identify something that then gets highlighted and then developed and fielded very quickly. So talk to us about the changes that have to happen on all sides of this ecosystem to generate the kind of responsive Army that everybody acknowledges we need in an era of great power competition where advantage will be measured in minutes, no longer years.
So it's kind of an interesting question. How do you do this? You raised the issue about the rapidity of culture change. Well, some years ago I was privileged to be able to be the first person to put robots in the field. And you bring out a robot and tell the private, hey, I got a great idea for you. Take it up and put it in that cave. And they think, you want me to put this in the cave? This is not my idea, it's your idea. So we took it out, we brought it in the cave, and actually deployed them. Our small team ourselves took our brass off, no one knew our ranks, and we went in the caves.
And this was the packbots when you guys were fielding them.
Right. And so one of the things that I saw was kind of interesting, and I see it again now, is the young people were easy. They wanted to change. They wanted to see new opportunities, new ideas. They said once they could gauge the risks of taking a new direction, they would jump right on it. The senior people, same thing. Yep, I want to get that done. Kind of there's the slow middle, because they've been taught, like Pavlov's dog, to salivate when the bell rings. Now you're coming in here and telling me don't salivate when the bell rings. So from a cultural perspective, that's where we've ended up having to primarily make our focus. We certainly have senior leadership. All four senior leaders are very focused on culture change for the Army, thinking about things faster, thinking about things newer, thinking about an entire MDO concept. How do we fight the future fight? Army Futures Command being instituted so that they can help change the culture of the requirements development process and the way that the acquisition community and AFC work together. So there are a number of really active, large movements that are happening around us. And then what you have to do, what I've done is I do town halls. In fact, I'll be doing one on Thursday with my acquisition people to help particularly the middle, understand what's the senior leadership trying to do. I don't worry that much about the young people. They're going to see this new way of doing it, and that'll be their way of doing it. It's that middle piece. I just have to make sure that I transform them. And they're all good people. If they want to do the right thing, just have to help them see how to do the new thing.
And what are the ways to see that, right? I mean, the military system, as you know from your earliest cadet days, is, where are you rewarded and what are you punished for, right? So what are the incentive structure you're setting up in order to encourage folks to let go of that which they know for a better future that they may not know as well now? Is it through the promotion process? Is it through incentive? Walk us through the carrots and the sticks you're using to try to encourage people to go in this new direction.
Well, so the military and government service doesn't quite work like the civilian sector, where there's a great deal of financial incentives that are put on the table. Certainly for the military, it doesn't work that way at all. For the civilians, we have restructured some of the positions so that it's not just simply a grade and step process, but there is your performance impacts significantly what your pay base is. So that those type of things are in the background, but they're relatively inconsequential in my view of really making the fundamental culture change. Where the fundamental cultural change comes in is back to the ringing the bell. They'll change if you help them understand what you want them to do. I've always found it bad leadership by the senior leaders like myself who walk in and say, I want you to do something else. I want you to take risk. That's one of my favorites. Take risk. You want me to jump off the cliff. You want me to trust that there's a net down there. Well, you go first. So what I've done is I've come in and I've explained, what do I mean by risk? There are knowns, there are unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. It's kind of a well-known adage. But I start
Rumsfeldian, but appropriate.
well, it's useful, but I don't leave it there. I start explaining what would I consider. If you got a known, do something about it. Right. At least have a plan. Unknowns, talk to each other, communicate. That's one of the problems I see. My unknowns and your unknowns are two different unknowns. So if I communicate with you, we might find out that some of my unknowns actually you know. So therefore I can address them. Move everything as far to the left as possible. And in that communications process, you're also going to learn about unknown unknowns, because some of my unknown unknowns are your knowns. So I explain that to them, and then what you'd have to do is you have to back them up. I've had programs where people have come in and they've done things, but they did it the right way. I frankly wish that the outcome hadn't been quite what they ended up with. And then I said, well, you laid out what you wanted to do. It makes sense. I understand why you did that. Okay, we're going to correct the course, and we're going to move on. Excuse me, but I'm not going to. There's no consequence to you. And when you do that, the people themselves really do start to believe that you want them to change. That's how you get culture change to begin in a large organization.
And how do you drive culture change among the contractor community, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're the ones who are manufacturing these systems that the smart folks at Futures Command, right? Leadership is identifying, Futures Command is refining, you're on the executing part of that, right? Each has a legal authority on the requirement side, you have it on the acquisition side. How are you getting industry to change? Because industry, at the end of the day, they're shareholder or return-driven companies. The Army is asking them much more than ever to put a lot of skin in the game. They're willing to put the skin in the game, assuming that the program succeeds. A lot of questions about that on FARA, for example, the Future Attack Reconnaissance aircraft. A little bit of a concern with how much resources the contractors are going to have to put into that and the potential return. And at the end of the day, the companies also are more apt to sell what they have as opposed to developing something new necessarily that you may want. The hardest thing to kill a program is, the contractor makes a jobs case, for example, not to kill it. Boeing was very effective taking the Block 2 case, whatever the merits were at the end of the day, to say, hey, let's continue to do that, and Congress agreed with them. How do you drive this culture change on the industry side of things as well, so they're as closely aligned to what it is you want to achieve? Because you and the Army leadership are talking about some very tectonic changes to get rid of systems that have been in inventory for a very, very long time, and each one of that has a financial line attached to them.
Well, so industry is a little bit the other side of the coin. There are many of them that are, they're patriots. They want to do the right thing, but at the same time, they don't get a paycheck at the end of the month like an employee does necessarily. So what they have to do is they have to establish this exchange. The value of the money I have as the ASALT in my pocket is got to be less valuable to me than what you've got in your pocket, which is technology, ideas, et cetera, et cetera. So this exchange has to occur. It sounds simplistic, but it actually is I can't make you come up with good ideas, and you can't make me give you money. We have to find this juncture. What we need to do is enhance that exchange process, and that's part of what some of the things we're trying to do with AFC has been, what some of the things we're trying to do with the PEO system has been. We're much more open. Anybody in industry can ask to come sit down with me. I try to give them a half hour and open the door. We don't have lawyers in the room. There's no contract negotiation. It is simply an ability to exchange ideas. We have the X-Tech search here so that we're communicating some of our our early desires to how can you bring a technology, how does it apply to the military? It's not just a Toys R Us place. It's a place where you need to show me how I can bring your technology to bear against our warfighting needs. Conversely, AFC does a similar thing through its factory down in Austin, where people can bring in ideas, they'll take a look at it, and just as General Murray, Mike Murray was saying in a talk that he gave just the other day, he's looking at those technologies and available opportunities, not just because they're innovative and neat, but that they have some potential application to the military. We try to open the doors to communication between the two communities as well, so that, because sometimes I can have a technology I can't quite see how it would apply because I'm not an expert in military operations. Conversely, sometimes I'm a military guy and I see no reason for your technology. So if we spend time talking to each other and wrestling ideas, we tend to get to a little bit better place.
Talk to us a little bit about the intellectual, the IP, intellectual property policy you're developing, as well as the manufacturing policy, because at the end of the day, each of these are very, very important parts. The government wants to control more data rights on things that you have spent to invest, you've invested in to own, although contractors like to retain those data rights because it ensures them a long-term seat at the table, but you may want to inject competition in that process at some point. Talk to us about the intellectual intellectual property policy that you're developing, as well as on the manufacturing side.
So these two are tied together. They're not by policy, but philosophically they are. I have patents. I own intellectual property. It's about the only thing I can own in this job. When I had been on the inside, in the government side of things, and I saw the way that we treated intellectual property with general disregard. I was on the outside, and I had some, frankly, abusive behavior on the part of the government towards some of the intellectual property I had invested my money to develop. At the same time, I also worked in the commercial sector where I worked for other companies. If I was, by one of my large clients, would ask me to develop something, I developed it. I also delivered it. Government doesn't ask those questions because we really don't think about intellectual property. So when I was coming back in the government, I said, we're going to establish a policy that's going to be fair. It's going to be fair to the industry people who have invested their funds for their intellectual property, and we're going to be fair to the taxpayer, because the taxpayer pays for a lot of intellectual property, which, because we haven't paid much attention to it, they don't get control of and they don't get possession of. So the intellectual property policy that we have is in fact designed to do that. If I'm going to propose something, I want you to propose for me what it is, and you're going to define, just like you would in a commercial contract, what your intellectual property is going to be that you're going to be including, and then you're going to tell me how much that's going to cost me, and you're going to tell me where it goes in your idea. So if I don't want yours, or you think it's too high a price, I can at least mentally for the bid pull that out and say, I'm going to replace it, I'll build my own. On the other hand, if you've got a good product, I'm going to keep that in there, and I know how much it's going to cost me, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And now I can start making calculations. So if somebody offers me a $100,000 vehicle and all intellectual property is free, okay, now I know the price of the vehicle now and long term. If somebody offers me a $75,000 vehicle and there's all sorts of licensing terms on a bunch of intellectual property, I know what the government's going to be paying for in the long run. So this is the type of approach that we're trying to do. Fair. And oh, by the way, if I've paid you to integrate your IP with something else, then that integration is mine, because I have the taxpayers' money that I have to shepherd. And so I believe, and it's not only that I own it, you better deliver it so that I keep my destiny in my hands. That ties over, you raised the issue about advanced manufacturing policy that we just did. Advanced manufacturing is more than just additive. I mean, everybody thinks about the little printers, and there's a broad spectrum of printing. But we have additive, we have subtractive. My lab, we had this machine that would You stick a piece of metal in there and you program it and it'd turn it into any shape you wanted. It was great. A lot of fun. So we've got those two. There's others, conformal, there's some casting, there's some forging types and those type of things. So that's why we talked about advanced manufacturing. There are many methods to doing this. I want to cut down our logistics tail. It's expensive, and we're not where all the time we can get FedEx deliveries. So therefore, how do I get a bolt, maybe a common bolt that I need because a vehicle is down because of that bolt being broken, but the nearest one is 8,000 miles away in the United States. I either have to spend money building warehouses full of stuff, because I don't know what stuff's going to break, so I have to predict that, and then I have to stock it, and then I have to have a logistic transport methodology. Instead, one of the things we've done is we've taken the additive manufacturing process, and we've constructed small laboratories that are initial efforts at seeing how far forward we can push these things, down to direct support battalions, which do the maintenance for operational units in the field.
And you tried these in Afghanistan as well.
Yes, yeah, there's some maker labs that we put in Afghanistan. Now what we're trying to do is put those maker labs basically inside of units and then see the training that we need for the unit and the qualification for the part, because just because I can cut you something that looks like a bolt doesn't mean it is a bolt. So processing is important. And how do we keep the database? How do we keep it straight? How do we know it's the right one for that application? So there's a big background piece to this that's going to be developed over some time, but the overall concept is I want to maximize my ability to get materials into the field in the hands of soldiers, keeping vehicles up and operational for readiness. I want to reduce the long tail into my logistics support area. I want to reduce the size of my logistics support area, and I want to make sure that if I'm producing a proprietary part that was back in that bid, that I know the licensing fee that company should get, because that's their intellectual property. They've allowed me to reproduce it. They're going to get paid their licensing fee, even though I didn't buy the part from them.